I'm Dave Stokes. I'm a MySQL community manager for Oracle. That means I go around the world evangelizing on MySQL products. I'm also a lightning rod back to Oracle management. So if you ever have a question, concern, gripe, or just what are you guys doing, concern, get in touch with me. I can get to upper management and get you an answer very quickly. Email is david.stokes@oracle.com. Twitter is Stoker. The slides are up at slideshare.net/DavidMStokes. Look for the name of the show, LinuxFest Northwest. And there's 2 slide decks, one for my earlier presentation, one for this one. And I ought to start by saying many years ago, I was working on a series of great computers and got tired of having the operating system killed off by the vendors. I thought TOPS 10 was a great operating system, and then I went over to VaxVMS and Ristus, thought those were great operating systems, and they kept getting killed off. So I ended up moving over to Unix just because there was more than one vendor selling Unix. And as my career took these weird turns, I was playing with something, I was playing with the BSD variants, and someone handed me this stack of floppies and said, there's this crazy guy from Finland who's giving away a Unix-like operating system called Linux. And from there I transferred over to that. Now this talk is for Linux admins who are also responsible for databases. You know, you walk in and they say, hey, we know you can do all this, but we're also going to give you the database. They also probably want you to sweep out the kitchen, but they haven't been able to figure out how to put that in your job description. So, because I'm an Oracle employee, I have to put this in here. This is just saying if I talk about future products, don't hold me to them. Things on future products, take it with a grain of salt. I'll tell you when it's a future product. It may not be delivered as I'm saying. I say the color blue, you're thinking sky blue, I'm thinking royal blue, and it ends up being aquamarine. MySQLs Now, past 20 years old, working our 21st year, so we're no longer the bright, shiny toy. We have some new stuff that if I have time, I'll talk about later. To encourage participation, I throw these out. So if you have questions, pop them up here. By the way, the only dumb question is the one you don't get answered and you take home with you. So be sure to let me know. I used to be the MySQL certification manager back in the MySQL AB days. So if you have a MySQL certification or know someone who does, you might have my name scrawled at the bottom of the paperwork. Like I said, I got tired of having operating systems killed off and went to Unix and then Linux. And I've worked for a lot of different companies doing all sorts of stuff with Linux. So you are an admin. You probably have several servers and some other ancillary tasks. Now you're looking at doing everything in containers, on virtualized boxes. You're doing stuff in the cloud. And they also hand you the database. But you have no DBA training. Well, databases are a little bit different than everything else you run into. They're selfish. They really want the entire system to themselves, period. Nothing else out there. They're very happy that way. They're messy. They suck up memory. They suck up disk space. They chew up your bandwidth. And they also take some of your sanity away. And they're growing all the time. There's always updates. MySQL isn't as bad as some of the other ones, but there's always updates that things get patched or fixed. And you find out that the database ends up sucking up a good part of your time. In short, databases are toddlers. In the software world, that's basically what they are. Well, that's the view of a lot of admins out there who get stuck running databases. So, here we're going to talk about how to have a happy MySQL database. A lot of this transposes to other databases. We're going to talk a little bit about hardware, software, the needs to do backup, how to do backup with replication, some tools that I really recommend, and some suggestions to make your life easier if you're running MySQL. First thing, databases love memory, period. The latest CPU, whether it's the latest i7, doesn't matter as much as having memory. If you can keep all your data in memory, it's amazingly fast. The more you have, the better, and by good quality error-correcting memory. Well, the big reason why memory is reading off disk is 100,000 times slower than reading out of memory. 100,000 miles is 4 times around the Earth. And if you do a sit-up a second, we can come back late tomorrow afternoon and catch the last couple hours of you doing those sit-ups to get 100,000 of them. So 100,000 is a big, big, big number. It tends to boggle the brain. Disks. This is an area that's changing rapidly. Go to a lot of the big shows and I talk to the disk vendors and I ask them what's coming, and they don't really have a good idea. If you can, for your database, move your logs away to separate disks than what you have your data on. Separate controllers if you can do it. You really want to keep the random access of your database as pristine as you can from other traffic. Do not log onto slow devices. Replication, bin log, or whatever. Try to keep them on fast devices. Use a RAID array. By the way, my minimum that I recommend is RAID 10. If you want to do RAID 5, that's okay. Do whatever you're comfortable with that you know you can pick up with. Do not use consumer-grade disk drives. That little SSD that you're selling at Best Buy for $50 with a coupon might work great in your laptop, might work in your tower. It's not going to work 724, 365. You need commercial-grade disk drives. Caches. You have caches on your disks and your controller. They both lie to you. If you don't believe me, talk to your hardware vendors after a beer. There's two types, write through and write back. Write back lies to you and says, hey, I got the information, go ahead and do on what you want to do next. Write back takes the information, sends it, or write through sends it through to the controller. Both of them don't act that way usually. The trouble is they tend to be written to confuse the driver, so they tend to say they're doing what they're doing, but they're really not. Go through your benchmarks carefully, look at the vendor specs, make sure if you do have a write-through that it is really write-through. Also make sure they don't auto-tune during production hours. What they'll do is they'll try to figure out, well, how much can I grab from here, what do I really need to do? So they try to balance what's going through them. Unfortunately, they usually pick the worst times by themselves to do that. So if you can program it at certain times, if not, turn it off. Fusion I/O cards. MySQL and most other relational databases write everything twice, so in case of a crash, it's written down in one place and you can recover from that. Fusion I/O cards have an atomic write. That means you write it once and it's there. You turn off double buffering with MySQL 5.7 and you speed up your I/O 50%. Now the vendors are coming up with a lot more things that are kind of memory-based and a lot faster disk drives with spinny things and a whole bunch of hybrids. And this is changing the database world. Previously, most databases had a cost-based optimizer. What's the most expensive thing to do to get your data around? And base that cost on figure out how to do the query. Well, that used to be on disk reads. Well, now that you have a variety of drives, solid states, NRAM, and all this other stuff, you're now seeing vendors like MySQL come out and be able to let you tune, so you can actually be able to pull data from 2 or 3 different devices at different costs. Network. Never ever expose your database to the outside world. They don't write this down. It's not obvious, and about twice a year I run into someone who's done this and ends up rebuilding everything. Also, whatever data you get from a user, make sure you or your programmer scrub it rigorously. Not only SQL injection, but there's also all sorts of other nasty things they do. It is a little bit of overhead and a little bit of a pain in the butt, but make sure whatever you get from the outside world is what you really want. Also, keep a separate network for replication and or backup from your main traffic. I'll explain a little bit more on that later. How many of you are running MySQL 5.5 or better? Okay, 5.1 or earlier? Good. MySQL permissions are kind of permissive. The first thing it does is it checks to make sure that your host is on the whitelist, that your box is allowed to connect. Once it does that, it does a hash of the username and password. The only trouble is it's, like I said, it's permissive and it lets people in who might not be who you think they are. This example here, boss at home may not be equal to the same network mask as boss at work. They end up getting different permissions. Unless you're auditing this and taking care of it, you don't know if that's really the boss working from home or someone else has a similar name, and they might have different access to the same information or different access. MySQL is overly enthusiastic. The first match gets in. If you go through the security manual, there's a whole bunch of wonderful examples on this. If you are not a DBA, but you're administrating a MySQL system, please go through and read this. It's a little scary the first time, but you need to know it. Also, I'll talk about this a little bit more later. Configure your server to use IP addresses instead of machine names. Why? Your DNS server goes off because someone's doing an update, and all of a sudden your database hangs. It's not the network's down or the DNS is down. The blame's going to go on the database. So use numbers instead of names. I've been killed several times by bad zone transfers. Slave servers. If you're not used to MySQL replication, what we do is we have two boxes, a master and a slave. And that's not a pejorative term, that's the industry term. It comes from electronics. Master has a copy of the data, slave has a copy of the same data. You make a change on the master, move it over to the slave has the same changes. So they're back in balance. Now slaves should be bigger, badder boxes than the masters. They have to do more in shorter time. So spend your hardware money on making sure your slaves are really, really good. Also, there's some MySQL utilities. I'll cover them in a little bit more detail later. They're scripts. They're free, available from us, written in Python, easy to extend. They'll let you do things like check permissions, clone servers, set up replication, set up automatic failover so that if one of the masters goes down, you can automatically switch over to one of the slaves. They're really easy to use, and they're good to have in your toolkit. If you're a sysadmin, you have a set of tools. I'm just adding an extra tier to that. Also, have your slaves, as I said, have them on a separate dedicated network for avoiding network contention. You don't want your LDAP server firing up and killing off your needed backup slaves of all your daily cash and sales information. Your accounting folks will not like that when you tell them, gee, I lost it all because we changed the domain name. Software. Run the latest, greatest version of MySQL you can. MySQL 5.7's been out for 6 months, going on 7 months. If you're not running 5.6 and looking at 5.7, you need to wonder why you're hurting yourselves. New versions of MySQL have better performance, a lot of bug fixes, and a lot of neat features. Now, if you go 5.5 to 5.6, you pick up roughly 15-20%. 5.6 to 5.7, probably another 10-12% easily, just by upgrading the binaries. Also, keep MySQL by itself does not play well with others. Most relational databases don't play well with others. If you have something like a light memcached layer, fine. You don't want to put other services out there. You don't want to run 20 instances of Nginx for various websites on there. Databases, like I said earlier, are toddlers. They want to have the entire sandbox to themselves. Swapping. Lots of articles out there on the internet. You don't want your database to swap. A swapping database will hang and ruin its data. So whatever you do, configure your box so it doesn't swap. Backups. Thou shalt do backups. And you'll make sure that the folks around you know how to do backups. And what I mean by doing backups is not just writing it off someplace on a CD-ROM or a tape or another disk drive or doing an LVM snapshot. You have to know how to take that material and be able to restore an entire database or a table or a row. If you and your staff can't do this, you're basically wasting your time. Now, if you can do it and your folks around you can't do that, that basically means you're never going on vacation. If you win the lottery, they're going to kidnap you and chain you to the computer room. You're never going to be able to get away from doing what you're doing. So make sure that everyone knows how to do that. Also, be careful where you keep your offsite backups. Many years ago, a friend of mine was storing stuff at a company down the road from them, about 5 miles. They had a big bunker-like facility, and they said they were impervious to just about everything. Northridge earthquake hit in Northridge, California. That's where my friend was working. That's where the data was stored. Their systems go down, no problem. I'll just go down the street, get the backup tapes. Go down the street. Backup tapes are under about 20 tons worth of rubble. Out of business that day for the rest of the business. Now, MySQL replication is easy to set up. It's a 5-minute typing exercise now. If you follow the manual and you're a slow typer, you can get a master and a slave or multiple slaves set up very easily. As I mentioned earlier, we have scripts that will set that up for you. It's easy. If you're in an Oracle shop and you're setting up replication between Oracle 11 or 12 instances, it is a week's worth of typing, and then you're not sure if you're going to get it to run. So MySQL makes it very, very simple. Now, for Linux admins, you need to know that we have 2 types of replication. The standard is asynchronous. The master writes the changes to the data to a binary log file. Slave comes along, gets a copy of that log file, transfers it over to itself, has another process that reads that copy of the log file, the SQL thread is called, and applies it to its copy of the data. Very simple. We also came up with semi-synchronous. This is where the master pauses after it writes the binary log and makes sure that at least one slave acknowledges having a receipt of that data. It may not have applied it to its own copy of the data, but it has a copy of the data in its greedy little hands. You won't run into semi-sync too much, but when you do, you have to be careful. You have to monitor it separately. If semi-sync fails, it falls over to asynchronous. Before MySQL 5.6, all replication was single-threaded. This is the airplane model, where you go through one door at the airport to go down the one aisle to get to your set of seats. With MySQL 5.6, we made it so that you would have parallel replication, but not within a database. With 5.7, you now can have parallel replication within a database, and as long as the transactions aren't overlapping each other, they'll go in fine in parallel. Works really slickly. Okay. With replication, you don't need to replicate everything. The example I like to use is in my lifetime, the United States has not added a 51st state. So a table that lists all 50 states and their state abbreviations, it's not that vital to keep it backed up. Your cash and sales data, your catalog orders, whatever your customers are sending in that's making your business money, you probably want to make sure you have copies of that fresh and ready to go in case something happens. Also with MySQL 5.7, you can change it on the fly. So if something starts changing, there's something going on with one of the divisions and you don't know you've been told, hey, make sure you capture all this, you can change it on the fly. With MySQL 5.6, we came up with something called a global transaction ID. Every transaction has its own ID. In the past, if you were doing replication, you had to find out where the master was on its log file, where the slave was on its log file, and set up copy from here to here until this catches up over here. Really messy. Now that every transaction has an ID, you bring a new slave up and say, okay, start at transaction number 1 and keep going till you catch up. A lot simpler, easier to automate, saves a lot of time and sanity. Something we learned to do with 5.6 was we started storing the replication data inside MySQL tables using the NODB storage engine. The most popular storage engine we have right now is NODB. It's ACID compliant. That means it does transactions. It knows how to handle crashes. Something goes wrong, it can rebuild itself. Our other storage engines, notably MyISAM, don't do that. So we figured out that if we start putting our replication data in this crash-safe storage engine, everything works a lot better. So if you're not running 5.6, you need to look at it. Also with 5.6, you okay?
Yeah, someone left a mesh bag in one of these rooms. Sorry for the interruption.
No problem. Anyone have a mesh bag that's not in their possession that's not theirs?
She has a power cable in it.
And it has a power cable.
Hey, in Haskell, don't let that speaker leave until I see him after his thing is done, please.
Okay.
Ooh.
Okay.
I just need to grab this slide.
All right, apparently it doesn't seem to be in here.
Doesn't seem to be in here.
Sorry about that.
No problem. Run into a lot of sites where they want to have two servers, have both servers active, both have the master. MySQL doesn't recommend you do that. There are ways to do it, but you're going to end up spending a lot of time and sanity keeping them running. Usually what you do is you have system A that increments the odd numbers and system B that increments the even numbers. It's messy and it needs to be watched and it's a lot of overhead. If you are a novice DBA or an admin that's been handed this, start looking around. It's not an optimal situation and it will bite you in the butt. Now with MySQL 5.7, we introduced multi-source replication. Multi-source replication lets you take the output from several slaves and pull it onto one master. This lets you have one big comprehensive backup set, or if you have a bunch of little slave servers going off and collecting like data from an API and you want to make sure you have one copy in one place, that's the way to do it. If you're doing sharded data, don't have the shards overlap, and it will keep everything nice and happy for you. Group replication. This is kind of in beta stage right now. If you want to go out and try it, please kick the tires and report any problems you have. The idea is that you write to one master and it will automate the other masters for you. This is going to be our Galera killer for those of you running Galera. The great thing about this is at the server level. It's not a process running above that tends to get stalled out. What's nice about this is you can pull a master off for maintenance and put it back in. It will automatically be updated by the other masters. The folks who are writing this are real slick, and we hope to have a non-beta version sometime this summer or fall. How many of you are in companies that have big Oracle setups? Okay. If you don't want to do your own backups, we can back up through Oracle Enterprise Monitor, which your company probably already has, and right to the right big STB backup drives. Saves you a lot of time and effort. Also, you can use the Oracle Database Firewall and Audit Vault. We have our own database firewall, and works rather nice. So if you know what transactions you should be running, and someone tries to inject something, like a pissed off programmer says, okay, take everything from payroll and send it to Larry's account, they can't do that. Okay, back to replication. As I mentioned earlier, we have 3 threads. Master to slave. This is where the master writes its copy of what changes to a binary log. The slave grabs that log, that's the second thread, and then log to data. Now, the best way to do backups for you, especially if you're in a small shop, keep your master running, get to the replica, turn off the SQL thread. The second thread here, the slave to log thread, keeps collecting all the changes the master makes. You lock all the tables, you do your backup, and then you turn back on the SQL thread, and it will catch up. That gives you a perfect point-in-time backup that you can use to recover the master from, or the slave if you have to. Easiest way to do it. That's a pictorial representation for those who think visually. Tools to make life easier. There are lots of tools out there for GBAs and folks who have GBA tools. First thing is you need some sort of monitoring software. If you're an enterprise customer, this is the only thing I'm talking about where you actually have to pay money to Oracle to go out and get. Our enterprise monitor is probably the best product out there. If you're not going to pay for that, there's all sorts of things. Things you can buy like from SolarWinds or for Percona and all that. I'm trying to think of Baron Schwartz's new company, Vivid Cortex. Those are going to cost you a couple $1,000 to run on your instances, but they'll give you a good hint. If you don't want to pay for that, there's Nagios and Cacti plugins all over the place. Whatever you use, you have to use something. Why? Well, like I said, databases are toddler. While you're off taking care of the LAN that went south in the top floor of your building, something happened on the database. And people are complaining, but you don't know what it is. And without monitoring software, you can't come back and say, oh, we ran out of temp space, or we ran out of disk space, or there's 1,500 users on there when it's configured to run for 1,400. You need something to be able to go back in time and say, what happened? If you don't have that, it's poor admin practice, and you're basically walking around in the dark, not knowing what you're going to trip over. Active monitoring. Active is going to watch and send alerts. The 2 best out there are Enterprise Monitor and SolarWinds DPA. Nagios Cacti work pretty good. If I'm not mentioning your favorite, it's not because I'm sliding it. It's just that I don't play with it often enough to be able to recommend it. If you like it, as long as it's giving you what you want, keep using it. Now, if you want semi-active, MySQL Workbench, which is our second most popular download, can actually go out there and let you see who's consuming what resources. It will give you a dashboard of performance, buffer hit rates, number of connections, number of bytes transferred, all that sort of stuff. Also with 5.6 and 5.7, we have the SYS schema. SYS schema is a bunch of views and stored procedures written on top of our performance schema to give you a view of what's going on. It will tell you which queries are running without indexes, which indexes are redundant, who's hogging your I/O, who's taking up your disk space, who's chewing up the CPU time. You could actually sit down and actually track processes running through so you can find out, why is this query slowing down over time? Is it just system load? Is it the way the data is architected? It will give you hints into that. Also, PHP MyAdmin, I don't usually recommend that. If you're in a PHP shop, you might have it installed. Bad news with that is it's sitting out there off your Nginx or Apache, and the script kiddies will find that and start playing with it. Just remember, just because you don't see all of a problem doesn't mean it's not going to affect your life. Something else you can do with MySQL Workbench is use it to look at queries. This will tell you that you have a query, and this red here says it's doing a full table scan. A full table scan is usually a bad thing unless you're in data warehousing or you're going through all the records on purpose like you're doing a quarterly roll-up of all your customers. If you right mouse over that box, MySQL Workbench will give you some hints on how to make life better. It will tell you, try some indexes on these columns, try doing this. It's great for optimizing queries. The other thing that's great about MySQL Workbench is if you're not a command line animal, like I was raised to be, it's a lot easier to add users, do backups, do imports, move stuff around, find out what's going on. In the old days, if you wanted to add a new user, you typed in a big thing where it said update user, select underscore priv equals single quote, update underscore priv equals single quote y, single quote, da 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 da. Big long string, and you usually forget a couple quotes in there, and it doesn't go anywhere. With this, you just point and click, great GUI. Also, it's an entity relationship mapper. Someone hands you a new product, you go out there and you have it map it for you. So now you find out what the relationships are between the tables. Print this out, stick it on the wall, you have great documentation of what's going on. Also, if you need to change it, so like you look at it and you find out that, this new product's email field is 30 characters long and our company standard is 50, you can reverse engineer it, send it back out there and be on your way. MySQL Utilities. These are a free download from us. As I mentioned earlier, they're written in Python, easy to extend. They do such things as setting up replication failover, copy user settings. Copy user setting is great if you have a dev and a production environment and something's working in production but not in dev or vice versa. You can copy and compare things. You can do diffs on tables and databases. You can look for bad processes and kill them. So if your boss starts running this fantasy football thing when you're trying to run payroll, get rid of it. It lets you move binary logs. You know that there's an employee underscore ID field somewhere in this database, but you don't remember what table it's in. You can grep for it. 27 of them, I think, right now. Get them in your toolkit. Also, look at Percona toolkit. Percona has some neat, handy tools that do things like let you do some online schema changes that are really nice. MySQL 5.8, which, by the way, we won't call 5.8, we're going to call 8. Big news flash there. We'll have a full data dictionary, so DDL, changing your tables will be automatic. If you're working around old DBA folks, they'll be happy to know that there's a version of Toad for MySQL available for Dell. It was the first GUI tool for Oracle DBAs and programmers from years ago. Also, there's several other tools out there. Okay, config suggestions. This is a case where if I was in the military, I'd be saying suggestions, and you would take it not as a suggestion, but a moral imperative that you do it very quickly. Turn off DNS lookups. You don't want your server to go down because someone's done a bad zone transfer. That used to happen to me in several environments till I get smart. You use in your config file, skip name resolve, and make sure that your permissions are set up to work off IP addresses instead of names. MySQL servers and most other databases keep statistics of how the queries run to help figure out how to optimize future queries. Now, what would happen with MySQL is it built up this lovely, lovely set of information, this great statistics, and then the server would have to come down and it would have to start again. So a query that was running really great in production yesterday after reboot drags for a while until it learns the statistics are built up again. Well, at 5.6, we set it up so that you could start saving off that information. so that when you rebuild, the queries don't drag. They know how to get to where they need to get to. So if you're really interested in that, these are some wonderful details. Go out and read that. It'll make your life a lot easier. Also helps if you dump the buffer pool and dump buffer pool at shutdown. That will help your server come back to life much faster. With 5.7, you can turn the verbosity of your log. So if everything's going great and there's no problems, just log the errors. If something starts going wonky, people start noticing problems, you can notch it up a level and say, okay, errors and warnings. I want to see what's happening. And then if you want more, you can turn on errors, warnings, and notes. You can also send all this information straight to syslog. So if you have tools that parse syslog and do intelligent things with that, your MySQL logs can now go to syslog. Also, big hint, we used to tell people to run query cache. The idea was that if you kept running the same query over and over again, keep it and the results in a cache. A query comes in, no need to run it, just send it out, send the results back from the query cache. Great idea. Great idea, but bad implementation. It's single-threaded. So if you're running an old version of MySQL and you have query cache on, you are slowing down here. So please turn off the query cache and free up that memory for extra things. The one thing I get asked by Linux admins at Linux shows usually is, how do I set up my MySQL server originally to get decent performance out of it? The one big trick, once you turn on replication and the buffer dumping I had earlier and the domain things, is set your InnoDB buffer pool size to 70 to 80% of RAM, physical RAM, and walk away. That will get you probably within 91, 92% of the best you're going to do on that server. And if you're not a DBA who knows how to turn things on, it's going to be academic. So if you are just a Linux admin who has responsibility, try to set to that and leave the rest alone. Let the server run itself. Big hint number one, be stingy with permissions. One of the things I used to hate about PHPMyAdmin is every time you set up a user on it, it gave them drop permission. For those of you who aren't DBAs or database persons, change the word permission to laptop or baby. Drop laptop. That person, without an account set up, can decide to drop tables, schemas, whatever, and blow you out of the water. And they didn't know they had it. And you didn't know they had it until they got rid of it. So go through what privileges are being handed out, and it's easier to give them piecemeal than have to rebuild your database server time after time after time. Also, if they're real novices in their tilde.my.cnf file in their home directory, put -safe updates or I am a dummy. What happens is someone will do, they're playing with their data, and they're going to do, I'm going to delete the customer that I'm playing with that I made up, and then the query will delete from customers where customer ID equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What happens is they forget the where customer ID equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they delete everything from the customer table. So schema, as I mentioned before, these are views and procedures and functions on top of performance schema, information schema that gives you a look into what's going on. MySQL used to be called a toy database because we didn't have the functionality, the instrumentation to be able to tell you what's going on at low levels. Well, now we have it there. We first came out with it with 5.5 and 5.6 of the performance schema and information schema. It took work somewhere between 5 and 7% of the overhead of this to run that. We now have it down to 1.5 to 2%. Now, if you're using MySQL Workbench, you can actually look at the performance schema stuff through a whole bunch of screens, and I can show that to you all later. If you need to figure out who's consuming your resources, this is the way you're going to do that. .5.7 came out last October. A lot of security features. We force a root password on you. You used to do an upgrade and the root password would be set to blank. Not a good thing. Also, we used to give anonymous accounts. That's where the username and the password are both equal to blank. Which means if you were careless, someone could get onto your box and do whatever they wanted with no authentication, no way to test them. And also, we used to force the test database on you. So the script kiddies would know, oh, they did an update. I didn't catch them while they had the anonymous account out there. I didn't catch them while they had the root password out there. But there's some exploits I can probably get through the test database. No longer gone. We also set up password rotation. So if your company is mandating that you change passwords every 90 days, you can follow that. We also have it so you can have various rules. How many links, how many characters, how many uppercase, how many special characters. You can now change all that. And because sometimes that gets crazy, we gave you something called the config editor. This will store your credentials in an encrypted file in your home directory so that you can log in by just referencing that. If you are looking for help, look for your local user group. We have a list of them up on the Oracle site all over the country. If you don't have one, start one. See me. I can get some swag to you. I can probably get some speakers to you. Also, network. Find out who your local user group, who the hot DBAs are. This would be a great show to network, find out who's in your area and can help you. Also, some groups have certification study groups, and sometimes they'll help you find a mentor. Let me go back to that. Boston MySQL Users Group has something called MySQL Marinate. It's a free virtual online class. So if you have someone who's just starting off with MySQL, they can go on, learn it, have their homework graded by a senior DBA at Mozilla, and become very, very good with MySQL very quickly, and it's free. So, I ran through that because I wanted to have a lot of time for Q&A. Slides went up there last night, and I have a blog, opensourcedb@wordpress.com. And if you ever need to contact me, please do not hesitate. I might be traveling, it might take me a day or two to get back to you, but I can do that. So, questions? Remember, you get swag for asking questions. Yes, sir.
Are you saying that you recommended master slave over master master?
Oh, yeah. Oops, sorry.
What's the behind that? What's behind that?
Usually most people set up master-master, and they don't really understand that the master A might change something that affects master B. Master B says, oh, this affects me, so I'll send it back to master A. Master A goes, oh, this is something that affects me. I don't have to tell master B about that, and ends up in a vicious loop. Okay. So another hand. Yes, sir.
Opinions on AWS Aurora?
I haven't played much with Aurora. They don't let us see the code for that. By the way, I'm horrible. You can see why I never made individual storing these things. Amazon's making a lot of money off offering MySQL, and so far I haven't heard much complaining, but there is a couple grumblings that isn't quite out of the barrel MySQL. So, but if it does what you need, it's an amazing way to scale. All they need is your credit card and your firstborn child.
Yeah, 75% of our AWS spend is RDS. And a lot of that is because we've over-provisioned storage and provision IOPS because, you know, the regular MySQL doesn't have the storage scaling.
Yeah.
So we over-provision it so that we don't have to take the system down on a regular basis, and we end up paying a lot for capacity we don't even use.
Yeah, I have a good neighbor who didn't find out that he was going over his ECB stuff until he got the bill and found out how expensive to go over. Over provisioning is good, under provisioning and going over is bad. So, yes, sir.
Do you recommend using IP addresses rather than host names? What are the downsides to switching to that? Like, what could we see as a possible problem?
Downside to using IP addresses over host names. You might have a network manager who has all these cute little names and no one can remember IP addresses. So where are you at? Oh, I'm on Fuzzy Toes 15. So you have to go out and figure out which one really is Fuzzy Toes 15. Operationally, there shouldn't be a problem. It's more like procedurally what happens to your company on a regular basis. So, yes, sir.
You mentioned a lot on what kind of hardware to use. If you're in the cloud, maybe not RDS where it's totally abstracted from you, but do you have any suggestions for those who are running their MySQL databases in the cloud that don't necessarily have the low-level ability to choose the hardware?
Unfortunately, this is kind of like buying shoes for your kids. What fit Tuesday isn't going to work on Thursday, and you know next Monday they're going to be bigger still. It's easier to kind of round up from what you guess is going to need, run it in a test instance, and then add like 15–20%, and then hope that you don't go for the ride on the tail of the dragon. I've known several companies that signed up for the littlest, smallest AWS they can get, and the company hits big, and they literally can't write the checks to Amazon fast enough to keep scaling, so, which is a good problem to have. Yes, sir.
You mentioned Schema and system performance. So
Yeah.
can you go into detail on like what are those and how to use them?
Well, we used to get nailed because we didn't have instrumentality to tell you what was going on, how many IO clicks were being sucked up by this one process. So we added the information schema and the performance schema with 5.5 and 5.6. That was like handing you an IKEA Allen wrench and putting you in a lumberyard and say, go ahead and build your own house. So one of our engineers, a smart man named Mark Lee, said, okay, I'm going to come up with the SYS schema. These are a bunch of prepackaged ways to figure out who's chewing up your IO, which queries are running without indexes, and prepackage that for people to use. And he's documented the heck out of them. So they're a good way to figure out what's going on at a low level of your system. Okay. Yes, sir.
You said to have, on your slaves, to have hardware that's bigger than your masters.
Yeah.
Can you have multiple masters feeding a single slave?
Yeah, that's our multi-source replication, yeah.
That's the preferred?
It depends on, the trouble with data is one size doesn't fit all. Oh,
Right.
Facebook is doing this, so I have to do this. Well, you're not Facebook, you're an auto parts store. You don't need 100 million people will contact you every second, you need 15. It depends more on your data and how it will flow. If you have a bunch of slave servers and you want to pull them into one, that's our multi-source replication. If you're looking to chain various slaves between each other, there's some ways to do that, although they kind of get messy. Yes, sir.
My question was, with Oracle, you can go and buy or pay for a feature to turn a switch on to have your database encrypted
Yeah.
from a security perspective. Does MySQL support that? I'm just asking.
Yeah. Database encryption at rest, nasty subject. You're about to see a whole bunch of stuff go about it. We kind of copied the Oracle model because we went one way. One of our forks went the other way. Our way is you have 2 levels of encryption at the master level so that we give you the low-level stuff, but we want you to do the key management through us, or you can go out through a third-party company that does key management. What we do is, well, the trouble with encryption is the key management is what kills you. The guy who has the passwords gets hit by a bus, your company's SOL. What we did is we have a password vault. So multiple people have the passwords to get into that, and from there they can get to decrypt whatever the data is.
Is that the term Oracle Wallet?
It's one of the phrases the marketing uses, but I'm not that. We call it the encryption key vault.
Okay.
Now, 6 months down the road, your PCI audit comes up and the auditor says, okay, re-encrypt everything with your new key. The way we have it, you change the master key and everything's automatically re-encrypted. The way one of our competitors is going to do it, you're going to have to do out and do the equivalent of an alter table on all the encrypted data and change all that, which is a lot of overhead. So what I used to do when I was doing stuff that was credit card processing, I used to just encrypt the fields that I needed through and threw them in a blob. I see some shaking heads, that's probably what you're doing. As the PCI standards get rougher and rougher and some of the medical standards change, you're going to have to go to at-rest encryption. And when that has problems, it's real nasty to debug. So. Yes, sir.
Geospatial data support, do you expect much improvement in that regard going forward?
Well, in 5.7, we worked with the boost.geometry folks to give you full geospatial relationship and special indexes on that. So if you need to do polygons around an area or any of that, we fully support that and it works beautifully.
Well, 3D, so, right? So 2D?
I haven't played with 3D, and I really couldn't tell you. I had some neighbors that were running PostGIS and everything else with MySQL, and when 5.7 came out, they were very happy and they switched over. So, yes, sir.
Suppose I have an online store,
Uh-huh.
say a VM running an online store, and MySQL is just serving on the same box. At what point do I start looking at having an external database server just running a database?
Well, the trouble with running any database in the cloud is database information is usually not ephemeral. You want to keep it around. You want it as permanent as you can get it. Everything else can spin up instantly, databases can't. When you get to the point where you really need to keep stuff around, I'd look at finding some persistent store through your cloud vendor. I've been working with some folks at Rackspace who, they have small databases for catalog information. You know, the latest shirts. If something goes wrong with that, they can reload it. Their sales information is on a persistent data store. So when you need to keep things around, move it out of the cloud, move it someplace persistent, it still has links to the cloud.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you mentioned it would be good to see some, so you mentioned documentation for some of these best practices that would be worth reading and such. I assume, I should probably already know this, but this is all online, or?
Chapter 6 of the MySQL manual covers 90% of what I had in here.
Okay, I guess that's my question. Do I buy or do I find?
I recommend going through the MySQL manual, chapter 6 first. There's some good books out there like High Performance MySQL that touch on security. They're mainly looking at performance. There's also some, by Googling around, you'll find little golden things. One of these days I have to sit down and write out that intermediate MySQL administration book. There's a lot of stuff for beginners and some stuff for the high end, but there's nothing in between.
So if one wanted to start doing proper backups or replication, if you say have essentially, you know, we're sort of doing the dangerous cheat, just nightly MySQL dumps when it's quiet thing, of course. But if you wanted to do a proper master slave thing, and you had you know dedicated MySQL VMs, but say a half a dozen, you could do that to say a big enough slave for all of them, probably.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
What usually happens is everyone uses MySQL dump, which is great when you're small, and then they start scaling. We have a new program called MySQL pump, which will do things in parallel, but it's kind of a little too new to use in production right now. So everyone goes from MySQL backup to something like extra backup or LVM snapshots, and that works for quite a while. The trouble is when you get to, say, Twitter size, and you've got 100,000 tweets a second, and you're trying to figure out, okay, I need to store this to sell it off to the marketers. How do I do that? And it gets really, really messy. Unfortunately, there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Sure.
And they'll even tell you there's a lot of stuff that they just don't try to grab because it's too fast.
Thanks.
Fine, 2 more questions.
For small databases, is there an option to run them entirely from memory?
Yeah. We have a memory storage engine. And you can also, there are some things you do to lock the server, this various processes into memory. Are you talking more data or processes?
Data.
Data.
Do you have to use special switches or will it do it automatically?
The big trick is have this much data and this much memory. Believe it or not, something memory runs 100,000 times faster than reading off disk. So if you keep your working set in memory, you're great. Unfortunately, that doesn't scale very well on our purposes, but for starting off, that's the best way to do it. Well, there's going to be one more question out here. Yes, sir.
You talked about the servers running MySQL, and I was wondering how the well, maybe it's the front end versus the back end, but the second server would be the heavier on the hardware.
Yeah.
Can you kind of explain the reasoning behind that?
Well, about 5 years ago, I was thinking the master had be the bigger batter box because it's talking to all the clients. And then the support folks from MySQL sat me down and said, no, it's the opposite. The slave has more of a demanding chore. It has to go out and keep up with the master while doing its own stuff. And therefore, it needs a little more horsepower. I don't know if that's a great analogy, but that's the way they straighten me out. Yes, sir?
When you say bigger, better for the slave, is it again kind of like tuned to your choice, or do you have like a guideline for how much bigger and better the slave should be compared to the master?
I like 10% fast. Well, I like faster disks. Period.
Right.
A little more memory. If you can get a better bus, better so. Local company near me was running at 80% capacity on their main server and the 3 slaves, and I started talking to them about doing hardware upgrades. And I said, when did you last buy hardware? 2002. Ow. They bought a bunch of little cute Dell boxes, and without changing anything else, they went from 85 down to 5% load. Well, actually, they did triple the memory in their main box, but it's amazing what hardware refreshes will do. But if you're just scaling out, try to make the slaves bigger and badder 10-15% if you can on memory and performance. Yes, sir?
With other relational database systems, we've done transactional backups. We would have like a whole, image, and then we have transactional. With MySQL, there's nothing really that I know of right out of the box that does transactional backups. We can bring it up to the last 15 minutes or something, or last hour.
The enterprise backup that you have to be a support customer will do that.
Okay.
The other way you can do it is run something like extra backup or MySQL dump and save the binary logs.
Yeah.
And then apply that.
Okay.
Is there anything really nice and neat where you just push one button, everything goes? Unfortunately,
Yeah.
no.
I got a bunch of stuff. Yeah. Okay.
So
it has to be enterprise like the other, like Oracle or.
yeah, and I hate to say it, but if your paycheck depends on your database, and you really don't want to pay $5,000 for a 4-socket box,
Yeah.
Talk to the folks from Microsoft.
So you were saying that one of the most important things you need to do is keep MySQL up to date
Yeah.
with the latest version. And in some cases, when organizations will release an update, it will have adverse effects on some people's systems, but not all of them. Is that something that people who use MySQL need to watch out for?
Yeah. Well, it used to be our QA folks, so like 10 years ago, tested the basic stuff. And now they have somewhere near 20,000 things they run through every night to make sure there's no regressions. Also, 2 years ago, people would call us and say, well, how do I go, there's something that broke in 5.6, I need to go back to 5.5. Well, we've never tested going back. But now that's part of our QA process. So every night we have processes that update a server from 5.5 to 5.6, 5.6 to 5.7, and then roll back. So the rollback is much smoother now with the later releases. If you do run into a regression, it's very, very rare these days. I haven't seen anything with 5.7. We had a couple things with 5.6, but they were reserved word problems that we didn't come along. But it does happen, but it's rarer now. So. Yes, sir.
Can you speak to, I mean, you talked about wanting to have the database reside in memory, but in the case of when the database resides on disks, can you speak to SAS, SATA, nearline SAS?
I can speak to SAS and all that, but not well. Software as a service is something that all the...
I'm sorry, I meant serial attached SCSI versus
serial attached SCSI,
nearline.
okay. Yeah. It used to be in the old days when I was doing a lot of admin stuff, you had Ultra SCSI if you were really hot and just regular SCSI if you're not, and maybe a couple of IDE drives if you were doing something on a small box. Disk drives are changing so quickly now with so many of the basically memory cards on a PCI slot or whatever slot. Now it's kind of hard to give you a generality. The big thing the hardware folks tell me is the faster is the better, and the bigger after that, the better. Some of the new technologies that are coming down that you'll see in the next 18 months are amazing. The Fusion I/O cards have been a real revolution in a lot of shops. So I really don't have a good guideline there because I'm not a hardware guy. Well, if that's it, one last word. Don't hesitate to contact me. And second, thank the volunteers who run this. They do this because they love you folks. They want the community to grow. And if you can help out next year, please do. And I hope to see you back here next year. Thank you very much.
Hello. Hi, I'm Philip. Really enjoyed the talk.
Oh, glad you liked it.
I had a question that I didn't feel comfortable asking in front of the whole group. So I work